Sure. So just a little bit of background. I'm an experimental psychologist and do acute laboratory research with cannabis, acute dosing studies. We've done edibles and vaporization in our laboratory. We look at different dose effects, pharmacokinetics, and things of that nature. Um, we've also done product evaluation testing and evaluated cannabis use disorder, cannabis withdrawal, as well as the health impacts of medicinal cannabis use in our research. So I'm here mostly to answer questions that the panel might have of me about edibles and concentrates. But in reading through the law, I did have some comments that I wanted to make. With respect to edibles, I think that it's going to be very important that you consider a number of facets, including dosage, including packaging, including the matrix in terms of food matrix that you're allowing to be sold in retail stores, testing and quality control standards, as well as labeling. And to kind of expand on some of those a little bit, I think it's going to be very important to have an informed establishment of a unit dose. So how do you package, how do you label, how do you describe the dosage of a cannabis edible product? Is it THC? Is it cannabidiol or CBD? Does it include other constituent components of the cannabis plant? The state of Colorado has kind of led that area in the United States by establishing a 10 milligram THC unit dose for their edible products. That seems to have worked fairly well in the state of Colorado, and in my laboratory, a 10 milligram dose has been associated with a discriminable drug effect, but not impairment on cognitive performance and functioning. However, if you have more than one dose and you get up to 20 or 25 milligrams, we do see some significant impairment and some adverse events. So with cannabis, there's a fairly narrow therapeutic window from where you're in a good place versus being in a bad place from a subjective point of view, and where you're going to potentially run into issues. So I think that dose characterization is going to be very important. And while 10 milligrams might be good, if you have a situation where people are going to want to ingest multiple doses, you might want to consider something a little bit smaller. Packaging is going to be important, not only in defining a dose within a package, but also with respect to child-proofing, so you don't have accidental ingestion of the products. That's become an issue in the United States. The matrix is important. So, and there are multiple examples in the U.S. of how that's achieved. In some cases, cannabis edibles are limited to gel caps or pills or capsules. In other states, you can have cannabis infused into popcorn, soda, chips, cookies, brownies, candy, and anything else that you can put in your mouth and eat. And so the question becomes is, what do you do there? How do you constrain it? And if so, how? The other thing related to that also is whether or not it's going to be limited to prepackaged retail products, or if you're going to allow things like restaurants to infuse dinners with cannabis. And if so, how do you regulate that? And how do you establish what a dose is? How do you inform the patron what they're getting? So I think those are all very challenging questions from a regulatory perspective, and begs the question and the need for, well, maybe we need to wait a little bit longer than a month to roll edible products out onto the market. My challenge to this committee is that what are you going to do to ensure that 1 year from now, when it's mandated that edibles get rolled into Schedule 4, that you're more informed to make those regulatory decisions than you are now? Because one of the big issues and the interest in this legislation, from my perspective, is that you're trying to eliminate a black market. And if you don't allow edibles and concentrates into this process now, you're not eliminating the black market. When I testified to a House of Commons panel in the fall, one of the panelists was a gentleman from the British Columbia, and he said that if edibles are not included, he will not stop selling them. that he has a big client base, and you know, he was unapologetic about that. And so I think you have to balance the intent of the law with your ability and capabilities to gather more information, preferably through funding cannabis regulatory science efforts in Health Canada or elsewhere. But you have to think about whether or not you're going to be in a better position a year from now to make these regulatory decisions. With respect to quality control and testing, each individual edible type, whether it be a brownie, a lollipop, or a piece of gum, is going to have standards for testing and for quality control. And there's going to have to be a defined allowable variance for whatever it is that you think it's important to test, whether that, again, be only THC, whether it be other cannabinoids. It quickly can get complicated. And so you're going to have to make decisions on what that is and whether or not that allowable variance is feasible within the matrix and big scale production, and also not artificially inflate dosing. So if it's easier to fall within 10% variance if your dose is really high than it is really low, and if you artificially inflate doses, then you run into problems with adverse consequences and adverse health events. I think that with the respect to the concentrates, you see a similar kind of issue where you're going to have to be cognizant of the concentration. So similar to alcohol, the higher the alcohol concentration in a liquid, the more difficult it is for the user to control their dose and to control their use. So you want to consider that the higher the concentration, the harder it is to titrate dose, and potentially more risk of harm comes about it. Again, I think you want to be concerned with residual solvents and having quality control and all of the important things that I think are pretty evident to regulate to minimize public health burden. So that'll conclude my opening statement.
Thank you very much.